and welcome to Scilence, a podcast that gives women a chance to get honest and open about what it's really like surviving and thriving in what often feels like a male-dominated world. All of my guests have been handpicked from the fields of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM, where inclusivity and diversity can be a real issue. I know this only too well, having been a mechanical engineer myself for a number of years. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, now a television broadcaster. I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation over the years, and through my TV work, I've met some incredibly inspiring women from a diverse range of STEM fields. These women are true trailblazers, and I've often felt so empowered myself by learning what they're like as real people, usually when the TV cameras have been turned off and they're just being themselves. Each week on Scilence, one of these women shares her unique experiences and truth, without the usual pressure and stress of having to promote her accomplishments or uphold her impressive reputation. How? Because all of my guests are deliberately kept anonymous and disguised to ensure that we as listeners are not distracted or maybe even intimidated by all the usual kinds of societal labels and trophies. The women of STEM on this show have amazingly impressive CVs, but most importantly, they're human, just like the rest of us, and I want to share the inspiration and wisdom that I often gather from them with you. It's my hope that you really relate to what we chat about today. If so, please do subscribe to Scilence and maybe even rate and review the show. I'd love to have your feedback. This week, my guest is in the field of pure mathematics. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I am so excited to speak to someone who is studying pure mathematics. I don't know why, a beautiful mind springs to my mind.
I think I'm a bit more normal than the mathematician portrayed. And actually, I think that most mathematicians are more collaborative and normal than the genius trope that you see a lot in movies and TV.
Yeah, I mean, we're speaking right now from your campus.
Yes.
And is your campus just covered in sort of like blackboards with loads of equations all over it and, that kind of thing?
So actually, I found that when I was studying in North America, we had a lot of blackboards, but here everybody uses a whiteboard, and I really miss the chalk.
Yeah.
But it's there's a lot of people and not a lot of office space in this campus for sure, but it's exciting.
Really? So is it not that stereotypical kind of like people wandering around alone and like lost in their heads?
I mean, I'm sure there are some people like that, but I think there's this trope in mathematics where people are like super genius and they don't know how to interact with other people, but they know a lot about some abstract theoretical craziness. And I think it's a little bit inaccurate because a lot of mathematics happens in collaboration with other people, and everything is sort of built on the work of other people. And so I think a lot of it is actually very collaborative, and I love to talk and ask questions to my office mates whenever I don't understand something, and sometimes they'll know the answer, and sometimes they won't, and then we'll just sort of commiserate at our mutual confusion.
Gosh, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I have been so excited to talk to you is because, how does one talk about maths? Like, when you're having a discussion with your colleagues, what are you talking about?
So what I do is in the realm of pure math. So I guess specifically you could say I do something called geometry, which is a little bit like geometry that you might have learned in school, but a little bit more complicated. And so a lot of the time we'll have sort of statements that we're not sure if they're true or false, and maybe I'll ask my colleague, like, is this a theorem? Has this been proven? Or is this just something I've made up? Or something like that. Or do you understand what this author is saying here? I don't understand this sentence, or something like that.
I mean, it really is abstract, isn't it? When you say geometry, it could it be applied to like a snowflake as well as crowd dynamics and that kind of thing?
So I think one of a mathematician's favorite statements for when they're applying for grants or justifying what they're doing is that it has applications in physics. Uh, but sometimes I wonder if that's
Stretching the truth.
not really why we study. Yeah, it's not really why we study a lot of the topics. I would say that it's more um, we study mathematics for the sake of it, for its own sake.
Right. For the beauty of
There's
it.
something inherently, yeah, there's something interesting about just sort of pursuing these abstract ideas, and sort of, if we assume certain very simple ideas, where can we go? What can we build? And like, what relationships between different abstract ideas can we find when they're built, when they come from different places, but they actually describe sort of the same thing?
Mm. Oh, it's just so profound and simple and just completely beautiful. The idea of just studying pure mathematics.
uh, yeah, that is definitely some of the appeal, and sometimes it's complicated and frustrating. So there's the balance, I think, between like when you understand something and you're like, aha, it all makes sense. The universe is beautiful, and then you don't understand something and you're stuck doing lines and lines of computation, and you sort of wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about sort of trying to apply for grants, it seems as though, and understandably, you've got to find real world applications, which is where the physics connections come in. What are the real world applications of your particular research?
So I think a lot of it depends what area of mathematics you're in, and sometimes um, a lot of the ideas that I work with were originally formulated by physicists, and then mathematicians took those ideas and said, okay, so we can't exactly solve it in these specific cases, but what if we generalize this idea, and sort of take it out of the real world and just sort of say what general things can we prove about the system that was born out of physics? So a lot of
Mm,
ideas do come from physics. Some ideas are more applicable than others. Like certainly, if you do something like number theory, then you have a lot of applications to important things like cryptography and um, but also you can go deep into another area like logic where you are really looking at the foundations of mathematics, and then you don't your applications are to other fields of mathematics. Actually, a lot of mathematical applications
really?
are to other fields of
Yeah.
mathematics.
Wow. I want your life. I don't like it just sounds so like abstract and just otherworldly.
Yeah, one thing is like when people ask you what you do, so like when you're trying to explain to a regular person who you meet sort of on the street or in a social setting, they're like, what do you mean you study math? Like, what does that mean? And then you sort of struggle to find the right words to describe what you're actually studying because it's all sort of cumulative. Like you start at the beginning and then you build on 4 years of an undergrad, and then you're doing research that is sort of that you only understand if you've been through all of that already. So sometimes
Yeah.
I know some people who are very good at it, who are very good at explaining what they do, but it's sometimes a struggle.
Yeah. I mean, you're now at PhD level, aren't you?
Yes, I am currently a PhD student.
And so when you get to that level, doesn't it become more like an art form, something creative?
I would say that it definitely requires a lot of creativity. So one of the most frustrating things that I get sometimes when I tell people I do mathematics is they say, "Oh my gosh, like I could never do that. I'm more of a creative person." And it's almost kind of
Mm,
insulting, the implication that doing math isn't a creative endeavor, because I think it's actually you have to be able to think of completely new ideas and come up with um, like creative problem solving is sometimes how I phrase it, but you have to come up with a new way to solve a problem that's very old, or
Yeah.
something like that. And that requires a lot of creativity. And a lot of the mathematicians I know are, they do math, but they have other hobbies like music or art, and they're very creative people. So um, I think maybe there's a relationship there between art and math for sure.
Yeah, because it's all kind of like patterns, isn't it? And sort of like harmonies and trends and things like that, ultimately.
Yeah, so there is a lot of sort of beauty if you can see it in the math. So in the same way that there is a beauty in art if you can see it, maybe.
Yeah, totally. Um, so, how did it all start for you? Was it really obvious from a very early age that you would end up doing what you do today?
I think when I was a kid, I wanted to be a vet or something like that because I really like animals.
Mm.
But I guess for me, I was. You probably get this a lot. You hear about kids who sort of typically a bit nerdy and a bit precocious about their academics. So I probably fit into that category. Um, and I had, I would say I was pretty good at math growing up, and I had probably some help from my family. Like my mom would definitely sort of encourage me and give me more things to think about than maybe was necessarily available to me through school. And then I had a really, really great female math teacher when I was in about middle school who um, really gave me a lot of support that I didn't ask for, but that she just provided me, and we would meet after school and talk about sort of math contest questions and stuff like that, which was really great. And so I did um, reasonably well on a couple of these
Hmm.
contests early on when I was sort of starting high school, and then I went to I went to a summer math program, which is possibly the nerdiest thing in the world, but it was wonderful, and I met some people there that I'm still friends with,
Oh,
and um, there, that's where I really was able to see sort of pure math beyond what they teach you in high school, and there I sort of decided that this was something I wanted to study more of, so I continued to study it from there. I guess that's the short version.
right. And so when you say I was pretty good at math at an early age, what you mean to say was you were like, you stood out.
So I think I did fairly well in school, and I found that in general grasping. So one of the things that we find is that um, when students move from numerical mathematics to the
Mm.
first sort of abstraction of like having letters in their math, so having an X in there, so that's a place where a lot of students can trip if their foundation isn't solid enough. And but I personally I didn't really trip until I saw some deeper things in like much later. It took me a while
Mm.
to get to somewhere where I was like, okay, I do not understand what is going on.
Right.
Yeah,
So it kind of came naturally to you, mathematics.
I guess so. And um, but I personally like to credit that to the fact that I had people who were supporting me mathematically from a young age and who really sort of helped me build that foundation, because I think without that I think it's really a matter of what you're exposed to. Um, rather than any sort of natural talent or anything like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just I hope that it's more about sort of what you do than what you're given with, like, given by natural. I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Natural selection or something.
A nurture. I'm a believer
Nurture
in nurture
rather
rather
than
than
nature.
nature. Yes.
Yeah. So, is your mum in STEM?
She is, yes.
Oh, okay.
She is in chemistry.
Oh, okay. So was she always kind of championing STEM subjects then as you grew up?
Uh, I guess so. Yeah, I think um, maybe it was because that's where she was strongest, or maybe it's because she thought that it was more important. But I definitely feel like I got a lot of sort of help from her in terms of um, building my foundation.
Mm.
And which isn't to say that I wasn't interested. I also liked to do puzzles and uh, solve problems and and that sort of thing. So I think there's this game that my mom and I used to play. I loved it, and it's hard to believe, but the idea is you take four playing cards and you have a deck of playing cards and you draw four of them at random, and then you 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 try to use each of the cards once to get the number 24 by sort of combining them in
Mm.
terms of like multiplying or adding or subtracting or dividing
Yeah.
those four numbers. And I remember like asking my mom, like, can we play this game? Can we play this game? Can we play this game? Because I really liked it. Um, so
That does sound fun, actually.
it was a bit like a very simple puzzle that you could solve and then feel good.
Yeah. The only card game I know really well is Snap. And I would much rather play your card game. I'm going to do that the next time I'm traveling. That's really cool.
I think I was also like competition averse as a child, so I didn't like games where you could lose
Right.
because I didn't like to lose. So this was a game where you sort of played against yourself, and then you couldn't really lose.
What if you can't get to 24, by the way? Then you choose four cards again?
Yeah, I think you just draw four more, and then you go with those instead.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Put those other four cards at the bottom. I don't
It sounds
remember.
way better than Snap. That's for sure. um, so, it sounds like you definitely had a balance of nature and nurture, which got you into maths and, kept you there. So how has the journey been? Like, have you thoroughly enjoyed it the whole way through, or has there been a few sort of like bumps along the way?
I would say there were definitely bumps. um, it's a very hard subject to be in. At least that's what
Yeah.
I personally find. And there's a lot of sort of self motivation to keep studying it because a lot of it isn't very applicable, and so there's not a sort of
Yeah.
moral justification that I can
Right.
find for studying it. But and it's also very hard. So like I've definitely had times in my undergrad where I couldn't solve a problem and was up very late at night trying to complete a problem set and just cried for a few hours because I
Oh.
couldn't solve a math problem. Uh,
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you. I know what that feels like.
uh, I mean, it's a ridiculous sort of idea, but I think it happened. So I multiple times. So I think definitely, you know, no matter who you are, at some point, like you'll run into an idea or a concept that you just can't wrap your head around, and other people seem to grasp, with ease, and then you'll sort of feel like, why am I the only person who doesn't understand this? And then it's kind of a discouraging feeling. But I think the thing to realize is that everybody
Mm.
runs into that block at some point, and um, it's sort of a universal experience to be confused, and that a lot of concepts I found that at first they're very confusing and it's very hard to understand. And then you have to do a problem set on it, and you can't solve all the problems because you still haven't grasped the original concept. But maybe like a few months later, you'll run across the concept again, and somehow it'll just fall into place, and you'll be able to make sense of it.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you ever really struggled with self-doubt, though, even if you did come across challenges.
Oh.
Or is that a totally false statement?
Mm, uh, I um, I definitely have struggled with feeling like maybe I'm not cut out for this subject, um, and and definitely have been and continue to be a victim of imposter syndrome. Um,
Oh, really?
oh, for sure.
How
I
come?
just there's there's a lot of um, really competent people, and when you feel like you're the only person who doesn't understand something, or you can't sort of grasp why these people are even talking to you, or you don't know how to
Mm,
talk. I don't know. It feels like it's something that I'm continuing to work on for sure.
yeah. And how have you been dealing with that so far?
So depending on where I've been, I found different things that help. So definitely having people who you can talk to about your struggles and who can sort of say, "Oh, I'm going through that too," really helps, because especially if they're people that you sort of think definitely belong in the field and they're struggling with the same things as you, then that can really be a good place to find support. When I was in undergrad, or even now, the other thing that's really helped me is to find a mentor or somebody who is sort of at a more advanced stage in their career, and to talk to them and have them tell you
Mm,
stories of how they were, what they felt like when they were in your place, and so that you can see that
yeah.
there's sort of um, a place to go beyond where you're currently feeling, where you're currently stuck.
Has it mattered whether those mentors or advisors are male or female for you?
For me personally, it definitely did really help. So for example, when I was doing my undergrad, I didn't really notice this at first, but all of the older students in mathematics were male. So all of the sort of students that I could say like, oh, did you enjoy doing this course, or did you find this hard? Should I take this course, and that sort of thing. They were all male, and I didn't really think it was a problem until I started to notice it, and then it became more and more obvious that there wasn't somebody I could necessarily talk to about exactly what I was struggling with. Um, and so it was really helpful for me to eventually find a female math professor that I could talk to within the department, and I called her my math mom, and it was it was really nice to talk to her. So we were doing a project together, so we would talk about mathematics, but then we would also have conversations, sort of just about how life was going and that sort of thing, which is very
Mm,
nice. I remember being like, oh, I had a horrible week. I was in this class and someone told me to shut up, and she was like, oh, well, I had somebody tell me to shut up just the other day too, and we'd like sort of commiserate
yeah.
over mutual experiences, or I'd say like, I'm really struggling with these things, and she'd say something like, oh, don't worry about that, just it happens to everyone, or she'd say like, why are you worrying about that? Suck it up, and you just need to get
Mm,
through it. And sometimes that was exactly what I needed to hear, and it was really nice to have somebody like that to help me sort of um, in my studies. Yeah.
yeah, have someone to resonate with, I guess.
Hmm.
What are the gender ratios in mathematics?
um, I mean, I don't know the exact statistics, but
Mm,
I can cite some sort of some bad examples. uh, that I've
Yeah.
experienced, if you want.
I mean, I mean, are you generally surrounded by guys or?
Yes. So I was just in a seminar like an hour ago, where I was the only woman in the room. It's a
Oh,
pretty small
wow.
seminar, but I've also in my
How many in the seminar?
in my cohort, so in my year of this PhD program, there's about uh, 16, 17 students, and three of us are women.
Right.
I've in my undergrad, I remember there was this one course I took where um, it started in September, and people sort of drop in and take the course, or they like
Mm.
drop out of the course. But by November, I was the only female student who would show up consistently to class out of about 30 to 40 students.
Right. Were the girls dropping out or just not making class?
Uh, so there was one other female student who was still enrolled in the course by then, who just never showed up. But I think at the beginning of the course, there were about six of us. So there weren't many to begin with, and then most of them
Right.
left.
Why do you think they left?
Sorry, I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just sort of sad.
Why do you think they left?
Oh, it's a complicated question, isn't it? I think what I've heard is that there are more and more undergraduates, female undergraduates, who are enrolled in mathematics. But then as you go on, there's a sort of pipeline problem where you lose people in later stages of the career.
Mm, the old leaky pipe.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly why it's happening. I think there's probably a lot of reasons and a lot of factors that go into it.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's not a lot of there are few. I mean, there's just not a lot of visibility in some, depending on where you are. There might be not a lot of visibility, so there might be, you know, 10 male professors to every one female professor in the department or something like that, and that's certainly not helpful. Um, I think there's a lot of unintended sort of programming that you get at a young age that says if you're um, a woman, that maybe you're bad at abstraction, or maybe you're bad at math in general, or that I've heard also that like women are taught that failure, like to sort of be very avoidant of failure,
Oh, really?
and that this is sort of something that's unintentionally programmed into girls at a young age.
Mm,
And I feel like certainly in mathematics, you're going to run into a lot of things that you don't understand,
which feels like failure.
and moments, yeah, moments when you feel like you failed. Um, and maybe that has something to do with it. I mean, it's hard to say for sure what exactly is the root of the problem. I think there's probably lots of problems.
I asked that because I wonder whether, when you were going through your challenges, whether it was an option for you to drop out.
I've often considered changing my route, so maybe I've thought about it, but not in such a serious way that it was actually a possibility for me. I think
Mm,
I've
yeah.
always sort of been on this path and sort of just said, well, I'm on this path and I'm still okay with it, so let me see where it goes, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. What does it feel like when you're sitting in a seminar and you are the only girl? Like, are you very conscious of it?
I personally am very aware of it when it's happening. The interesting thing is I've often pointed it out to my male classmates or peers, and they'll be like, "Oh, huh, I guess you're right. Like I didn't see that, but I definitely noticed." So I think there's this phenomenon where like you don't really notice until you're the only one in the room, and then you
Yeah.
definitely are super aware of it all the time.
Yeah. And what effect does it have on you?
I think there's sort of a lot of pressure, maybe that is unintentionally put on you when you feel like you have to represent all women in the context of where you are. Sometimes people interact with you a little bit weirdly,
Mhm.
and um, you wonder if it's because of your gender. It's definitely sort of another thing to be thinking about all the
Yeah.
time when you're in a space. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it can just be so exhausting having to do that additional thinking on top of everything else. Like, do you
Yeah,
find that being in a minority as a female add to your expending of energy?
I think for me personally, it does. I'm not sure how much it does in terms of just sort of mental stress, but I definitely have had moments where I've agreed to do things or be part of committees or groups because I want there to be a woman doing something. So, for example, volunteering to lead sort of math circles or something like that, I'll often sign up. Um, One of the reasons being teaching is wonderful and very fun, but the other reason being I want there to be a woman who is teaching math to children, sort of
Mm,
just to increase the visibility. Um, and because I know that it's something that I struggled with when I noticed that I didn't have any upperclassmen who were female. Um, I was I wanted to make sure that if somebody was in my shoes, that they would be able to find
mm,
somebody who was female and
yeah.
that they could talk to.
Has it had any kind of sort of like maybe unconscious impact? Like if you are the only female in situations, like do you maybe dress differently or act differently, or like are you aware of any of that?
I think when I was an undergrad, I was a very stressful test taker. Um, uh, so I think maybe sometimes feeling like you have to do well in order to represent, you know,
Yeah.
your group, your minority, that can certainly add to the stress. And I'm not sure what the relationship with that and my performance actually was, um, but I definitely sometimes felt that pressure. And I find that nowadays I try to hold on to my femininity in um, whatever situation I'm in, and to because there's a lot of really lovely qualities that are, tend to be considered feminine. And I think we could definitely use
Mm.
more of those in math sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, do you have the courage to actually let those feminine traits be exposed? To give you an example, when I was in mechanical engineering, I would totally play down my femininity. So I'd like dress in really baggy clothes and, just generally try not to highlight the fact that I was different. Like, do you find yourself doing that, or are you proud to celebrate the fact that you are different?
I think I am pretty feminine in the way that I portray myself. So in my fashion, in my sort of demeanor, I try to be true to myself, which for me means feeling pretty and uh, you that sort of thing. I think it really helps when there are other women around, um, because you can sort of relate to them, and there's a bit less pressure to sort of assimilate to the guys. But I think at least in math, if you're a woman, there's a lot of other women who are willing to sort of go out of their way and talk to you. And I think that really has helped me sort of um, be confident in my femininity, and that's really good.
I'm so glad that you are describing it that way because sometimes when there are so few in a minority, sometimes those few can turn against each other. because it can get quite competitive. But it doesn't sound like you are experiencing that kind of environment.
No, and I think maybe when I was now at this point in my career, I think that a lot of the men that are around are very supportive and aware and don't necessarily have those sort of toxic masculine traits, and they're not super competitive and that sort of thing, which I encountered a lot more in previous years, and that could have to do with where I am and just sort of the environment that has been fostered by the people around me, because I know that's certainly not the case everywhere. But I also think that it's not a very successful sort of attitude to be um, hyper competitive and that sort of thing. I think you get a lot further in math, and you're a lot more successful when you're able to be collaborative and supportive, and that you help each other. I think everybody sort of learns more that way. So I think a lot of um, at least what I found is that a lot of the toxic traits have like died out as the years have gone by, which in terms of progressing in my career, which is really really nice.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about failure, because certainly when I was studying math, like it was the one subject that didn't, where experimentation and uncertainty was not involved. And that's why I kind of loved math, because it was so logical and so binary. But
Mhm.
I would have thought, like getting to your level, that there's so much more uncertainty involved. So, like, how come there's still this culture of like failure is not allowed?
So I'm not sure where that comes from. It might just be something I've internalized. Um, but I think that for me, I grew up sort of having a good grasp on most of the concepts that I encountered. So when I did start to slip, it was um, sort of a new thing, and it didn't happen for me until I was doing sort of more hardcore pure math, and so I think that's I think we all struggle with failure, and that's where I first met like uh, where I first where I first met failure that I thought I should have been able to overcome.
Mm,
And I think um, as you said, pure math, it's not really about experimentation. You just sort of have to,
find an
you know,
answer.
find the
Yeah,
answer. And sometimes it's very hard to, because you need to come up with some sort of trick, or you need to really understand the tools that you have very very deeply in order to sort of see how you can apply them. And when you just don't make those connections, it feels like you failed.
right. Has that influenced the way you approach your life?
Oh my goodness.
No, sorry. No, the reason, yeah, sorry. I'm
uh,
sorry.
I don't know. I haven't thought about
That is a massive, sorry. That is such a massive question. No, the reason why I ask that, I ask it so flippantly, but it is actually something that I'm so aware that my mechanical engineering training has really influenced the way I perceive the world. And so I'm just so fascinated to know whether studying pure mathematics has really sort of like shaped the lens through which you look at the world, you know?
Hmm. I have to be honest and say I haven't really thought about it, but I guess sort of trying to break down something and see sort of what are the root causes of it is definitely something that I do
Mm,
in real life, which is definitely also something that you kind of do when you're doing math. I don't know um, which way this happened, if I always did this and that's why I decided to pursue mathematics, or if I mean it probably is there's arrows pointing both ways, um, in that I've sort of I do this, and then I was trained to do this in math, and so I do it in real life, and also I did it in real life, so I was able to do it also in mathematics. I think
Mm.
maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I really, I personally just approach the world in a very binary way.
Hmm.
Like it either is or it isn't, or, I tend to have quite black and white thinking because of the way my mind has been trained. Um, and I will admit that sometimes it causes me problems because life is not black and white. It's actually quite messy and grey. And
Hmm.
so, I just wanted to seize the opportunity to sort of like talk to a pure mathematician about it.
So there's this very cool thing in math where if you go down, I mentioned before that some people pursue logic, which is the study of the foundations of
Hmm.
mathematics. So what they do is they try to say, okay, so we have all of these conclusions that have been drawn from sort of logical arguments in mathematics, and they give us sort of what we have as modern mathematics. But what if we go back and try to see what were the initial assumptions that we made um, to get these sort of ideas that we have now? And if you pursue this field, you'll find that there are different assumptions that you can make at the beginning, and they will give you different mathematics.
Right. That changes everything.
So
Wow.
there are statements in mathematics that you can prove that you cannot prove um, with with using the tools of mathematics. So I think um, the idea of a binary approach to life is very interesting, and I think that if you go down the rabbit hole
Yeah.
of pure math, that you'll find that maybe like it's not so much just black and white, but it's sort of it depends what your initial assumptions are,
Yeah.
and that sort of informs what universe you live in.
Okay. So maybe actually as a result of studying pure mathematics, you have a healthy approach to life because you realize that maybe it's as simple as just changing the assumptions.
Yeah, I think, and I think the interesting thing is that um, some of the assumptions that you make, people will say like, let's assume this thing is true, or let's assume that it's not true, and let's pursue both of these realms and see what happens. and
Yeah.
and sometimes people have opinions about whether or not something is true or not based on what that universe looks like if you take that
Yeah.
assumption or not, which is
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Wow. I can now see where the debates come in. Because you were talking about debates right at the start and collaboration, discussion. And so, yeah, oh, it must be so fascinating. So, with math aside, what's the rest of your life like? Do you actually have space and time for other things?
I personally make a point to make space for other things because I like other things. So I definitely intentionally go do other things. So some of the related to math, I like to teach. I think it's really rewarding to sort of teach, and obviously I'm teaching sort of math or math related topics, but it's sort of a very rewarding and fun activity to be doing. I also do just like
Yeah.
personal. I have personal things that I like to do that aren't related to math at all, um, and I make a point to schedule those things in because I think it's important for my mental health to have a balance.
Yeah. Sure. It's quite interesting being female in a very male dominated subject. And, does it ever cross your mind at this stage in your life about all the other aspects of being female, like maybe motherhood and families and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've I've certainly thought about some of these things. I would say that for me personally, quite early on in terms of my stage of life. So I haven't reached any of those points necessarily, but I have definitely thought about them, and I have friends who are maybe at that stage, and I've I've listened to their stories, but for me personally, I've thought about them sort of as a theoretical thing in the future, but I haven't really actually gotten there. A lot of these.
Yeah. So you don't have like a long-term plan, a 5-year sort of like goal or
Oh,
anything like that.
to graduate, get that
Right.
PhD. That's a goal. But other than that, I
Yeah.
don't really know, and it's hard to say because if you want to stay in academia, it's not really certain where you'll be. Um,
Mm.
at least in math, the way it goes is you do your PhD, and then maybe you do a few postdoc positions, and try to land like a professorship somewhere. But where those jobs are is very uncertain, and where in the world you'll be is therefore also very uncertain. So it's quite
Yeah.
volatile in terms of sort of starting a life in a place isn't really something that seems feasible to me.
Mm. But it sounds like a priority for you is to stay in academia because it doesn't sound like you're driven by sort of like making money or taking your qualifications into the commercial world.
No, I'm not sure where I'll be in a few years necessarily, but I
Mm.
think, as it currently stands, I'd like to stay, in academics if possible.
I mean, what do people typically do once they qualify with um, similar qualifications to yours?
So I think, I have some friends who have gone, into, sort of more corporate careers, so working for a bank or for a tech
Mm.
company or something like that. I
Right.
have some friends
Yeah.
who have more focused on becoming teachers, so focusing on, teaching. I have some friends who work for nonprofits. I have some friends who have just sort of gone in a completely different direction. Um,
Oh, really? What's driving you to do what you do? Like, what's your ultimate like goal?
oh, I think it's really interesting. I think math is really interesting. That's why that's my main motivation. I really like learning it. That's sort of the thing that motivates me at the end of the day because, even though sometimes it's a struggle to understand, when I do understand, I think it's
Mm.
it's really neat.
Yeah. And I kind of get the impression that you grew up in a different place to where you are now. Um, do you have sort of like any dreams or aspirations to use your STEM studies to be able to travel? Or are you so interested in what you're doing that your location is irrelevant?
Oh, I do like. So one great thing about studying math is that they have, conferences all over the place. So,
Yeah.
you can. So there's a lot of this sort of thing where a group of mathematicians in one field will sort of gather in a place, and talk about what they're doing currently, what their research is in currently, problems that they're thinking about, and that sort of thing. And it'll take place somewhere,
Mm.
and so you'll have this opportunity to go to this place and talk to collaborators or other people who are in your field, and but at the same time, you get to travel to a new place, and that's very fun as well.
Where's the coolest place you've been for math?
For me personally, I guess I've been to a lot of different cities in Europe, on the east and west coast of North America. I know recently the ICM conference, so the International Congress of Mathematicians, met in Rio in Brazil, which is very nice.
Oh,
I have some friends
cool.
who are going to
Yeah.
Oaxaca this summer in Mexico, and there's a lot of
So cool. Oh,
a good excuse to
yeah.
travel and have uh, some fun in a new place.
Yeah. I must say, I'm just in absolute awe of you, because mathematics for me is just so beautiful. I mean, I use mathematics to sort of simulate how fluid
Mm-hmm.
flows. Um, but to actually sort of like study something that doesn't really have necessarily real world applications must be so cryptic and kind of otherworldly. And I'm very sort of like envious of the fact that you get to do that. Um, if you were to advise any young potential mathematicians that are considering following in your footsteps, like what would you tell them?
I would say find people that you can talk to about math and about life and about math life and who you can relate to in that aspect, who are supportive of you, because that's definitely very helpful. I would say get used to talking about math with other people and working on problems with other people, because it's very, very helpful, and that's the best way to learn. And I would say um, if you get stuck on something, that's okay, and you can sort of take your time and think about it. And if you don't understand, then um, not to be too discouraged, but to try to give it time, or to find someone to ask, to try to find somebody to explain things to you, and sort of to not get overwhelmed um, by by things that confuse you, and but definitely finding like sort of a community of people that you can talk to, or another person that you can sort of have mathematical conversations with, is super helpful and very important, I think, in my math career life journey.
Yeah, I mean, great advice. I'm going to ask this, even though I've been like really telling myself that it's inappropriate, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Um, would you consider yourself to be a bit of a sort of like perfectionist? Because, mathematics is so perfect in, you know, its manifestation. I'm just wondering, like, do you have very high expectations of yourself? Are you hard on yourself? Are you that typical type of perfectionist type?
um, I think I am sometimes. I think that um, I think I certainly have a tendency to sort of push myself and expect things out of myself. But I know that also sometimes that sort of thinking can be really hard on me. So I try to reason with myself, if you will, about what my expectations are for myself. And basically, I've I'm making an effort to sort of be more understanding with myself, if that if but I do like things to be in certain places, and have a lot of spreadsheets that I that I fill in religiously.
Oh, I really relate to that. I'm like, I do everything on spreadsheets.
Nothing is better than a good
Yeah, it just makes
spreadsheet.
everything so streamlined and so clear. I love it.
Mhm.
I'm so glad to have met a fellow spreadsheeter. So, I mean, I asked that because people who listen to this podcast, they are probably considering a career in STEM, maybe in STEM. There's something involved in STEM for finding silence. And people in STEM do tend to be quite hard on themselves and, have very high expectations. And I just wondered if you had any words of wisdom, given your experience, about sort of being tough on oneself, how you deal with it, because you really do come across as being very balanced and sort of like, I don't know, just maybe I was expecting someone a little bit eccentric. I don't know, and that's not the impression you're giving. So I was.
Oh, if I've managed to hide all the weird, that's very cool.
Yes, you managed to fool us. So what's the secret?
uh, um, I think that in terms of sort of keeping balance when you're trying to push yourself to do better is to always compare yourself to the past version of yourself instead of to other people or something like that. Because I think if your goal is to sort of constantly improve, then that's very good and very worthwhile. But if your goal is to be as good as people around you, then that's sort of a more dangerous idea, because you don't know necessarily where the people around you are at, and it's hard to sort of objectively compare yourself to other people. I think the best thing that you can do if you're striving to be sort of to improve in any sort of area is to just compare yourself to you 2 months ago or you 5 months ago, and say in 5 months I want to be better in this way compared to now, or something like that. I think that's a better way to sort of work towards goals. Is that good?
Yeah. That is a perfect way to end the show. It's just been so fantastic talking to you. I just feel thoroughly uplifted and inspired hearing your words of wisdom. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's a very cool show. I feel like there are so many interesting people that have been on it that I'm very honored to be also part of this.
You definitely earned your place here. Thank you so much. That's it from my STEM guest this week. I'm smiling from ear to ear. Purely because I am in awe of someone who can study mathematics. I think it's a secret envy that I've got going on. But what an incredibly balanced and lovely human being she seems to be. And I don't know, I'm just utterly inspired by someone who could be doing something so abstract yet sound so human and so down to earth. Thank you so much for listening this week. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review the show, and catch you next week on Scilence.